But so God says you won't know, no one will know the time or the hour.
Right.
So
What does that mean?
Does that mean it just because you've been able to kind of break it down to, you know what I mean, a 7 year, like you feel like, right, you've been able to break down kind of like the time and space that we are in where it's approaching. You're not saying that you know the actual day.
Well, while I was writing my book in prison, we were publishing it, send it home to the family, and they'd publish it on our website and stuff. And people kept writing me letters. I got over 8,000 letters while I was in prison. And they said, when's this going to happen? When's the Lord coming? I answered in my book and on my video. I said, look, I don't know. But if I had to set a date, I would guess 2028. And here's my reasons why.
That's crazy, dude. There's so many people that say that.
Well, we know our calendar's off at least 3 or 4 years because the Roman calendar screwed up. Jesus was born in 3 or 4 BC. How do you get born before Christ? Well, our calendar's off. That's the problem. And God seems to do everything in 1,000-year marks, 1,000 years as a day. It could be that the 6,000 years of human history, and then the day of rest is the millennium. So I said, I don't know. And I'm going to keep, if he doesn't come, I'm not going to be disappointed. I'm not going to sell my clothes and go stand on a mountain. Oh, here he comes, Yeah. Many people have done that. I'm just going to keep winning souls, keep doing the best I can.
Yeah.
Here's what God's going to say to me.
What would the 2028 look like? Would it look like nuclear warfare?
Don't know. Going to be, he said, they asked him this question, Lord, when are you coming and what's the sign? The sign was the sun and the moon go dark. You can read it, Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
The sun and the moon go dark?
So I looked, that's found 10 times in the Bible. The sun and the moon go dark. In Revelation chapter 6, verse 12, in Revelation is divided up. There are 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 vials, STV. 7 seals. At the 6th seal, when he breaks that seal, the sun and the moon go dark. That's when we're raptured out. So we're here for the first 5 seals.
Why has there been, are you saying this because there's been something with the sun and the moon recently?
Right, read it. Read what Jesus said.
Where?
Matthew 24. They asked him at the beginning, what's the sign, right? Skip down to verse 29. Read that one.
Okay.
So what happens when the sun and moon goes? How do people live?
Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from the heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken.
Keep going.
And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven.
When the sun and the moon go dark, we're going to see Jesus coming down in the clouds, exactly like it says in 1 Thessalonians 4 and half a dozen other verses. So they asked him at the beginning, when are you coming? What's the sign? He says, I'm coming after the tribulation when the sun and the moon go dark. Keep reading. The next part.
Would we be here for that moon part?
Yeah.
For the
If
moon
we're still alive, yeah.
And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of heaven to the other.
That's the rapture. The trumpet blows, we're gathered together, and we go up. When Jesus went up in the cloud and the disciples are standing there watching him, the angels appeared to them and said, why are you standing here watching him? Just like he went up, that's how he's coming back. He went up in a cloud, he's coming back in a cloud. It's right there in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21.
So the trumpet, how do we know where to gather?
He's going to gather them. You just keep doing what he told you to do. You stay faithful. And then he'll gather them together and take them up in the cloud. But it says, how he does that, that's his problem. I got enough of my own problems to solve. Let him. How he does it, I don't care.
So do you think it's a nuclear warfare that puts the sun and moon out?
We certainly have the capability of doing that, so don't know how it'll happen.
And this might be a really stupid question. Forgive me for this. But because I see you have it highlighted here, the abomination of desolation. What does desolation mean?
Go back to the other page, in the middle of there, to the chart, in the middle.
Okay.
You see that big yellow stripe at the top? Back in the Old Testament, they sacrificed a pig on the altar. And to the Jews, that's the ultimate, desolate the temple. In other words, desecrate, okay?
Oh, okay.
Okay. And so the abomination of desolation, to the Jews back then, was sacrificing a pig on the altar. He did it purposely, knowing it was against their religion. This time, I think it's going to be setting up an image. AI. Robot.
Hello guys, David Vos here. What a beautiful day it is. It's gonna rain here in a little bit. We're getting rain just about every day and it's just beautiful and the garden's doing so wonderful. I literally am blown away at what I realized or found in the last week. You may have remembered that I probably mentioned that I showed you pictures that I don't know, a few weeks ago, I looked out and there was this area in my garden. It was just growing and growing. I didn't pay attention to what was growing because I just planted a lot of stuff. And And I started thinking, what is this? It was just growing bigger and bigger, and it was just so lush. And I took a picture of it, and AI said it was Chinese spinach, which I did remember ordering because AI told me that would be the perfect food to grow out here. And that it was just very healthy, one of the most nutritious plants that would grow by itself and hardly need any water and just thrive and would get through the winters. So I remember planting that, but when AI told me what it was, they didn't say it was Chinese spinach. They said it was amaranth. So then I asked them, is that the same thing as Chinese spinach? They said, yes, Chinese spinach is a type of amaranth. So evidently, I've got all this amaranth. Well, then last week, I started noticing that this other plant that AI had told me before was lamb's quarter, but now I find out it's not exactly lamb's quarter either. AI is now saying it's orac or something, some other word. It might have been goosefoot. One of them was called that, or maybe they're all kind of called that, but it looks very much like the goosefoot or the lamb's quarter. But they're all related. They're amaranth. But it's a more wild variety, and it just grows everywhere by itself. And you can use the seeds for grain on that as well. And you can eat it, but it's not as good to eat as the other ones because it has a lot of salt and stuff that brings up from the ground and some oxalates or something. You have to boil it before you eat it. If you don't catch it when it's very young, then you can eat it as a salad, I guess, if it's really young. But so that a little bit disappointed me, except that I didn't find that out until just now. But yesterday, I noticed walking around my property that I've got this orac, which I thought was lamb's quarter. I've got it growing all over my property now. In just a matter of, 2-3 weeks, it's just popping up everywhere. I mean, all over my property. And so is the Chinese spinach amaranth, which is the good stuff that I purchased to plant. And they're both just everywhere. I mean, I've got hundreds of plants. It's taking over my whole yard, which is good. I'm not upset at that because it can't really take over the other plants that I've got that are already growing, but it's growing, and we're in this monsoon, so it's just growing with all this rain. So I'm like, okay, the way this is, how could this have happened? It hasn't had time to grow up and become seed and didn't start flinging seeds around. You'd think that the next batch would come next year. So I asked AI, and they said, no, it actually will produce several times during the year. It grows up and starts throwing out seeds all over the place right away. So it can, like, by the end of the year, can be just everywhere. And I'm like, what? Yeah, this is even better than I thought. And I said, okay, with the current growth and the fact that they say the seeds stay in the ground for years. So whenever there's rain, it'll just start coming. And since I have a monsoon season of 3 or so months, it just rains, it literally will grow up and then fling its seeds. And every year for 3 months, I'll have this complete forest and all of my property just thick of this amaranth. Not just one here and there, but everywhere. And that would mean that during the months where it's growing by itself, I don't have to water it because it's raining. I can be catching the water. And then when it's not raining and therefore the plant might kind of die back, I can water it just by getting a bucket. And it only needs a little bit of water, maybe once a week or something. This stuff is very hardy, especially the wild one that I've got now, the orchid. So I can literally take a bucket and walk around my property wherever I see it and drop a little cup of water on each plant. And if there's 1,000 plants, I've only used very little water. It's going to be extremely amazing. I will have this food available that will be also a grain for most of the year. Only about 3-4 months in the winter will it not be available because it's too cold to be growing then. So that is something that completely amazed me. I really feel as though the Lord is rushing me to get finished. I've got my duck pond almost finished today. It was a lot more work. I mean, I had to put in all these fence posts, and I had to build part of the fence out of wood because I didn't have enough chicken wire, and there's like a gulch or a ravine that kind of goes into the pond, which I had to figure a way to block off so the ducks didn't come out. And of course, I am going to let the ducks free range as often as I can, but I can't let them go out all day long without supervision because there's coyotes that just come and pick all the chickens and ducks off if I'm not standing there watching them. And I've already gone through all of this. So I have to keep my chickens and my ducks inside a pen. Even though my dogs are out here protecting everything and they hear a coyote, they run. But what the coyotes do is they sneak up and they're very quiet and they just lunge and grab the chicken and go. And my dogs don't have any time to catch them. So I have to keep them indoors most of the day. But what I have done is I start letting them out in the evening around 6 or 7, and they get a couple of hours to kind of graze, and then they go in and roost. But anywho, I just saw my ducks trying to mate, and they're going in their pen tomorrow. So that means I'm going to build these nests for them, and I'm going to figure out from AI what the best way to give them an area to. They're going to have some eggs, and they're going to have baby ducks. And AI said that if I end up in a situation of doom where the world's come to a place where it's collapsed, you can't go to the store or buy or sell because you don't want to get the mark or whatever, that with the Chinese spinach that's going to be growing everywhere all over my property, and the other orchid that I discovered, and the winter squash, and the pumpkins, and all the other vegetables that I'm growing, potatoes and Jerusalem artichokes and onions and chard and just all the things that I'm growing that I can easily. I've kind of been doing it a couple of years and I know how to do it and it's working. And a lot of this stuff just grows back every year by itself. I've got sorrel that's coming back every year by itself. I've got wildflowers that are coming back every year by itself too. But anyway, I'm really excited about this because they said if you take what you are, even if it was just the amaranth that you had for some months and the other plants, didn't do so well or whatever, or you didn't have enough for everybody, you'd have a lot of amaranth. And that, along with the duck eggs and the chicken eggs, would really get you through periods of time of famine. And we could survive on that. And so I'm very excited that the Lord has solved a puzzle that I didn't know if I could solve. When I first started doing this garden, I thought, well, I plant the garden and there's a few vegetables and then I can them? I'm not going to can them. I want these to grow so I can eat them fresh or boil them or whatever, make a stew or a soup. But I'm not a canner and I don't have all the time and the resources to do all this canning and doing all this. I can handle the amaranth, going out and picking them as well as the acorns and the other things I've got around here, which will also help a lot. And then just grinding it and making breads and things. So that's what I'm going to concentrate on. But with the eggs, and that could be added to the bread as well. You need an egg in your bread. But the health benefits with the eggs and with this amaranth together, AI says I can survive long periods of time where there's famine like that. So I'm really excited. And I'm also thinking, well, if people do come out here, and I think in the last minute, people are going to be coming out. And I've got some information I want to share with you today that I am very, 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 what do I say? I'm not sure because nobody knows the day and the hour, and of course. But I'm following a line of reasoning that I'm going to show you here today that seems to me, now it just seems to me in my little imperfect human self, because we don't know the day and the hour, but it seems to be kind of foolproof that we pretty much know that the Great Tribulation will have to begin no later than the fall of this year. And I will show you why I believe that. I don't know it, and I don't believe it. I didn't mean to say that. I just speculate that this might be. I mean, I've been saying it's coming within a year or two, for about a year or two. And then we had all this stuff going on with Iran, and I'm like even more sure. I had thought it might come last year or this year. And now spring is gone, and I don't think it's happened yet. But I keep looking at the news and thinking, man, it's about to happen any second. So I think fall would be a perfect time for this to all go down. We ought to be out of oil by that time. And they're going to switch over the markets and all that, obviously, very soon. So this makes perfect sense, and I've got absolute clarity on a few verses that'll blow your mind here today. But if that's true, and we'll show you, and you can make your own judgment here in a minute when I'm done explaining all of this, and if it's true that the Great Tribulation will begin in the fall of this year, and that does make sense, because Jesus died at the half of the week. But, I've told you guys before, 3 years ago I came out here, I just prayed, and the Lord literally took me here, told me what property to buy. I had a vision of the property before I even came here. He literally gave me the money to buy the property. It's all paid for. And everything I have done out here has just been by the hand of the Lord. And I literally felt the Lord saying, this is a refuge. You're building this. If you build it, they will come. I want you to have a place for people to come, and I want people to come out here, because when the tribulation begins, people will be coming. And so I've kind of been going on that belief, and I've been very, very sincere and completely convinced that the Great Tribulation would begin very shortly. I didn't know when, but very shortly. But also, I just want to say that this was one of the last things, getting enough water, what the Lord provided for me this last week, where I got that other 1,000-gallon water storage tank, and I've got another 2,000 gallon water storage. So I've got 3,000-gallon water storage, which will be plenty for my needs here. And the pond that I dug was leaking, but it's all worked out. I didn't even know at the time when I got the ducks, but they are going to be the reason that the pond's going to seal. I'm going to have plenty of water. As soon as I get the ducks in the pond, they start pooping in the pond. And I'm going to put all their poop that they've been pooping. And chicken poop even works better. And I'm going to put all that chicken poop and the duck poop in the pond, which will seal it. I know it sounds like, oh, you don't want to put poop in the pond. Well, if ducks are in the pond, there's going to be poop in the pond. Anyway, that's going to seal that. And so I'm going to have thousands and thousands of gallons of this type of water, which I wouldn't drink, of course, but I could use I got plenty of water that I can drink anyway. But I can use that pond water then for growing amaranth and vegetables and all these kinds of things, because duck poop is actually some of the best fertilizer that you can have in all the world. So literally dipping water out of that pond with the ducks pooping in it is going to be literally the best water you could put on any garden. So everything is coming along. I mean, then I was thinking, okay, even with a garden, how am I going to be able to just grow a garden and that's going to be enough food for me and other people, maybe that family, my daughter and other people, and how can I show other people what to do as I have done, if I don't even know how I'm going to be able to survive just living off of my little garden? And then this amaranth thing happens, and I find out that I've literally got amaranth growing all over my... And you know what? A couple of weeks ago, just 2 weeks ago, I would never have believed or suspected that I could buy a plant seed, plant it, and within a couple of months have it growing everywhere in my site, all over my yard, my entire property is full of it, just growing everywhere. Yes, it's because of the monsoon rains, but now that they've grown up and I know where the plants are, I can continue to water them after the monsoon quits. And besides that, we still get rain after the monsoons, and they don't need rain every day. So I imagine these amaranth are just going to thrive all year round around here, which will then mean that I have a viable source of food along with the eggs, and everything's working out. I'm figuring out how to do this, guys. It's just completely amazing. Now let's get on to what I was going to tell you. So, in the past, we've played around with dates. We know that Christ will return in 2,000 years from various verses of Scripture. Hosea, he will return after 2 days, and on the third day, he'll raise us up. So after 2 days, on the third day, that would be the third 1,000 years after Christ left. So that, along with Peter, a day in the Lord like 1,000 years, and we've gone over all these verses. We believe that more than likely, like that guy that I showed you the clip at the beginning, lots of Christians know this, Jesus certainly must come at the end of 2,000 years from the time that he died. But we don't know when he died exactly, right? And so that's what I'm going to share with you today. Now, that guy had a pretty good idea, what he said, but I'm going to pin this down a little better. And I don't blame him for not knowing this or anybody. I mean, that guy's really intelligent. I really highly respect that man. He has a lot of knowledge. He doesn't believe pre-rapture and all of that, and he's just right on about a lot of stuff. But I'm going to show you how what I've discovered now almost clinches it. I don't know how it could be wrong, what I'm about to tell you, that the Great Tribulation will start in the fall of this year. But we've always been trying to figure out, okay, they said originally for a long time that Jesus died in 4 BC. Then they were like, well, it could be 5, it could be. And then I remember Jehovah's Witnesses thought it was like 2 BC or something else, and other people had different ideas. Then I did a lot of research and I found out that the problem is that we know it from the Bible, that Jesus was born at the time that King Herod tried to kill all the babies to get rid of him, because the wise men said that Jesus was born. And so Herod made a proclamation that they kill all the children from 2 years old and earlier. So any child up to 2 years old, they killed him. So, and he made that estimate, 2 years, based on the wise men telling him when they saw the star. So, look, forget about the scientific reality. Like, could it be possible that somebody saw a star and knew that somebody was born? Look, that's the part that we understand that we don't know nothing about. They were astrologers, whatever they were seeing. Maybe it was an astrological sign or a star fell or whatever that they were following. We have to know that they were astrologers. They knew what they were doing. And the Bible is inspired, and it wouldn't say that they did all of this if it wasn't something that was real. So removing the, credulity and removing the doubts of, well, how can they do this by looking at a star? We couldn't do it today. How would they know? We just know that the Bible says this happened. And I'm going to believe what the Bible says. That these astrologers that came from probably Persia, probably Zoroastrian, Magi, we're told they're Magi, they were of the priesthood that Daniel was the head of 600 years before. And so this was a true science. Daniel could do this as well. That's what the whole book of Daniel's about, with all these astrological signs. So we have to assume that when Herod died in 4 BC, that Jesus was a baby and could not have been born before 4 BC. Somewhere right around 4 BC. Had to have been when Jesus was born. But that's not proof, because we don't really know when Herod the Great died. We only have Josephus, who says it was 4. We don't have any other historians telling us. However, we do have Herod's 3 kids that took office after he died. We know when they took office after he died. And we do know from Roman chronology that his 2 children took office in 3 and 4 BC. Exactly after his death, they took office. So that does clinch it to a 4 BC date. But we have more. And this is stuff that most Christians never talk about. And I learned something today that I've never heard before that clinches, I think, the 4 BC date, which means, I'll just give you a spoiler, it means that the Great Tribulation, we're going to show it has to be 3.5 years. It has to start and end 3.5 years later. At the 1,260 days, it will be over, because the angel swore with both hands, by heaven and earth, that it will only be 1,260 days. And then he says, happy and holy is he that arrives at the 1,335 days. And we know that immediately after the tribulation, Christ comes on the clouds of heaven, because Jesus said immediately after the tribulation, they will see the sign of the Son of Man in heaven and on the clouds of heaven, and he will come and gather his saints from the 4 winds. So the gathering of the saints comes at the end of this tribulation, which is 1,260 days. Daniel and Revelation always talk about this 1,260 days, 3.5 years. They never talk about a 7-year period. The only reason people think it's a 7 years is because Daniel said there would be 70 weeks of years. And the last week, or the 70th week of Daniel's 70 years, would be marked by at the half of the week. And everybody's misinterpreted that to mean that the Antichrist will make a covenant for 1 week. And at the half of the week, he will renege on it. But that's not what it says. It's not saying the Antichrist. There's nowhere in there that it says anything about no Antichrist. What it says is that at the half of the week, the one who is the anointed Messiah will be cut off. And that happened by Jesus. Jesus himself was the Messiah, and he was cut off at the half of the week. And then it says that he will make or confirm the covenant with the many for 1 week. And at the half of the week, he'll cause sacrificing and gift offering to cease. So Jesus came with his ministry. It says that the anointed Messiah, he shall make a covenant for 1 week. So this is part of the reason why this has been confused by all these individuals, because the way they translated this for a long time was he will confirm the covenant. And so they assume it's the Mosaic covenant that he's going to confirm. But that isn't what it says. It says he'll make a covenant. Who made a covenant? Jesus. Jesus made the new covenant, and he made that covenant for 7 years, until Cornelius, and they let the Gentiles come in. So there is the 3.5 years of Jesus' ministry where he's making the covenant. At the half of the week, he will cause gift offering to cease and sacrifices to cease. He did that by the death of himself on the cross. You see, so once Jesus died, now we're waiting for the last half of Daniel's 70th week. We already got the first 3.5, which was Jesus' ministry. So the last half of the week is the Antichrist job. The first half of the week to make the covenant, the new covenant, was Jesus' part. The Antichrist is the one who takes away the daily sacrifice or the daily communal offering of Christ and his sacrament that we talked about yesterday. They got rid of the sacrament. And now that they've gotten rid of the sacrament of Christ, to most people who don't know what it is anymore, they're going to then bring in the abomination of desolation, which is AI, and we'll show you that here in a little bit. We cut the 3.5 last years off from the last 7. The reason we do that is because Jesus said that if he didn't cut it short or cut it in half, no flesh would be saved. Now, why is that? I used to think it was because the tribulation would be so bad that everybody would die and he had to bring it short, cut it short. But he can't cut the tribulation short because he swore, the angel swore with both hands that it will be for time, times, and half time. So you can't cut it short. What it means is he's going to cut the time in half in order for the Gentiles to come in. And this is explained several places in the New Testament. These are called the Gentile times. And when the Gentile times are over, then all Israel will be saved. But then that's when the 3.5 years run and they see the one whom they pierced and they weep and they repent just before Christ comes. So that means that the cutting off is the last 3.5 years that's cut off. And the reason it's cut off is that if he didn't do that, no flesh would be saved. Why? Because in Jesus' day, they rejected Jesus. And so therefore they weren't saved. The Jewish people rejected Jesus. And the Gentiles had never heard of Jesus. So in order for anyone to be saved, there had to be the preaching of the gospel, which was the times of the Gentiles, right? The gospel goes unto the Gentiles. And it goes until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And then we get the last half of Daniel's 70th week with the abomination of desolation. So that's how that should be understood. Now, again, all of these possibilities of interpretation are not certain. We don't know for certain how to interpret all of these prophecies. However, that is my best understanding of it. I have seen it for years and years, and every time I go over it again, I am more and more confirming to myself that that is the true interpretation. Gathering other verses that I hadn't put together with it before just adds more and more to the conclusion that we're going to go through only a 3.5 year period of tribulation. That's why all the way through Daniel and Revelation, it's talking about this 3.5 years. Watch out, it's coming. Oh boy, everything that the Apostle Paul said in his epistles, they said were warnings upon whom the ends of this age have come. So we're the ones upon whom the ends of the age has come. And it's a warning to us, not for the first century. And if you look at the New Testament, it's very clear. He tells us about the days of Noah. He tells us about the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. He says, remember Lot's wife. So this is real, or else he wouldn't be telling us to it'll be like the days of Noah, right? Wherein few were saved, 8 souls through the water in an ark. Or remember Lot's wife, she looked back. Don't do that. Because Peter says the earth is going to be burned, it's reserved for fire and the destruction of ungodly men. I believe that these verses cannot be taken just in some esoteric way. Yes, they're all esoteric, but they're very clear. We're waiting for the judgment day, when everyone shall appear before the judgment seat of Christ. Everyone. It's the day of the Lord that's coming with wrath and fire and thick gloom. It's going to be judgment, not blessings. However, when the judgment is over, there will be the greatest blessing that you could ever imagine. And those who remain until he comes will be caught up with him and the Lord and his saints to ever be with the Lord. These are direct verses of Bible scripture. I don't see any way around any of it. These are things that are going to happen, and they're going to happen suddenly because you don't know in what hour the thief is coming, Jesus said. So, we can't really prove when Herod lived, except to just trust Josephus. Now, that's evidence for a date, but it's not absolute proof. We need more witnesses. So then there is the statement that John came baptizing in the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar. That is an absolute date because we can look at the Roman dating, their chronology, and they kept very good records. See, before Rome, BC, we don't have very good records. We don't know what year it was, right? But from the time of Rome, we've had this very good record. So in the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar comes in the fall of 27 AD. That's when Jesus would have been baptized, 27, when he was 30 years old. So we know that that is a correct date. Or at least we can be somewhat assured that it's probably true. Now, if then Jesus was baptized by John when he started his ministry baptizing, then we know that Jesus was baptized when John started his ministry. And that would have been 27 AD, as we said. Now, we know for another reason why Jesus would have been 30. Because a priest started his ministry when he was 30, according to the law. You couldn't be a priest before you were 30, and Jesus was going to become a high priest, or a Melchizedek priest, so he had to be 30. It's just a principle. They don't let children or young people, even the Apostle Paul says, you don't make a newly appointed man an overseer, right? Or a high priest or something. So Jesus was 30 when John was baptizing. And we can get the date for when John started baptizing as 27 AD. Because that's the 15th year Tiberius Caesar. And so, again, we can't prove that that date's correct. It's just what all the historians say. And they've got pretty good consensus that Tiberius Caesar, in the 15th year of his reign, was 27 AD. Because, now there is some controversy, because some say it was 28, 29, because Tiberius Caesar became the Caesar jointly in 27, but was entirely the only Caesar in both the East and the West by 28, 29. So if we start it when he became Caesar, then the 15th year of his reign would be 27 AD. And that's probably how they would count it. So that's good. So Jesus was baptized in 27. This means he died in the year 30. And we know he died at Passover. And we're going to show you reasons that I have now determined with two dates that we now have. Because if Jesus was baptized when he was 30 at 27, then that means he was born at the year 4 BC, just before Herod died. And it fits perfectly. But there's more. We know that Pontius Pilate was appointed by a man named Sejanus. Sejanus was an anti-Semite. I mean, he did not like the Jews at all. And he wanted people to persecute Jews. And Pontius Pilate was kind of an intermediary, because Tiberius Caesar didn't really want to kill Jesus, didn't want to kill the Jews, didn't want to invade Jerusalem. He just wanted peace. He just wanted them to be good. Sejanus, though, really was itching to get rid of these Jews. So Sejanus hated the Jews so much that he was trying to get Pilate to do bad things to the Jews. And so in the scriptures, it tells us that when the Jews wanted to kill Jesus and they said, kill him, crucify him, Pilate said, hey, how about you let him go? It's a custom. We let one of them go. And they no, crucify him. So what was he going to do? The Jews wanted him to crucify Jesus. And the Sejanus, who put him into office, wanted to persecute Jews. And Jesus was, a Jew. So, and he didn't want them rising up. And they thought Jesus was trying to become king or something. So it would be very logical then for Pontius Pilate to cave in and say, okay, fine, I wash my hands of it, kill him, while Sejanus was still alive. But Sejanus was executed by Tiberius Caesar in October of 31 AD. October of 31. So while it's possible that Jesus could have been executed after Sejanus was executed, that would mean Jesus could have been killed after 31 AD. And we just said that the crucifixion probably happened in 30. But it's more likely that Jesus would have been crucified before Sejanus died. Sejanus died in October of 31. So in the spring of 30 is a very likely time for Jesus to have died, because this man was pushing for his death, wanted him to die. And Tiberius Caesar didn't really want it. So he kind of forced Pilate into a position to wash his hands of it. And that's one of the reasons why Tiberius Caesar executed Sejanus, because of his plots against the Jews. So it seems like that it would fit quite well that Sejanus wanted Jesus crucified, and the Jews wanted Sejanus crucified, and he was pressuring Pilate to crucify Jesus and other people and persecute Jesus and his followers because he didn't like him. So it would have been very probable that when the crowd said, crucify him, that Pilate would have been put in a position where he kind of felt like his career was on the line. They were going to oust him. Sejanus put him into office. He could have took him out. So because of Sejanus and the people saying, we want Jesus die, we want Jesus crucified, it appears that Pilate probably gave in. But that's what was the undoing of Sejanus, because then Tiberius had him executed. Now, that again wouldn't be proof, but it fits the timeline, and it tells you that Jesus could not have been crucified after 31 AD, and probably sometime before that. So here's the thing that we'll show you here more in depth in a little bit. This indicates that it couldn't have been beyond about the year 31 AD. That only gives us a very short time left. We've only got 4 years to the year 2030, you see. So that would mean that the 2,000 years would go along, and Jesus would have to return in 2030, and the Great Tribulation would have to come sometime between now and a couple of months from now, in the fall of this year. So it looks like we're boxed in here. And all of the hypotheses and the dates and the theories that we got going on, it points to 2030 for the return of Christ. If it was any time sooner than that, we wouldn't have time for the 3.5-year tribulation. We don't have any time. It wouldn't allow for the time that the scripture tells us we've got to go through. So it would have to mean that Jesus would have to come, and the Great Tribulation's got to start this fall. And you say, well, how about if you go back and say that Jesus was born in 8 BC or even before that? We can put it anywhere we want. Well, if Jesus was born any time sooner, then he would have already come. 2,000 years is already gone. So we're boxed in here. Or what if we go later and push it up to 2033? Well, aside from the things that we've already mentioned, and we're going to show you here later that there's very little way that you could do that. Of course, we could have missed something. Of course, we might be wrong. But we'd have to be wrong about a lot of things. It just don't make any sense if we're wrong. Current events. AI. You know, we can't go much longer with this AI. They're going to control every move and every thought. They're going to destroy the world with these new data centers. So, you know, we could be wrong, but I don't think so. And I'm going to give you the evidence as we go. to lend itself to this idea that Jesus is coming in 2030 and the Great Tribulation starting this fall. But we have something else. Jesus said this generation will not pass away. Now, I know that I've said many times that the word generation means a race, the brood of vipers or the generation of vipers. So think of it this way. When something generates, it's from the beginning of its generation. It doesn't mean a timeline. It doesn't mean a time frame or 70 years. A generation isn't 70 years long. That's not what a generation is. A generation is a race or spawn. Now, that spawn might live 70 years. That's about how long each generation will live. So we're still using this concept of the generation. Biblically, it wouldn't have been 70 years, it would have been 40 years. All the way through the Bible, it uses this 40 years for the generation like of Israel or the generation of Moses or whatever. It would always say 40 years. And Jesus said that this spawn or this race will not pass away. So what Jesus is saying is that the people that were standing there crucifying Jesus, they wouldn't pass away, their group. So remember, Jesus is already 30. So, yeah, he would have lived 70 years if he'd have lived out his days, but they cut him off at the half of his days. And so all of his disciples were about 30. So that was the generation, people standing there. They was about 30 years old. They were going to live to be about 70. And so, this, even Jehovah's Witnesses used to say this. They used to say that, because they're the ones talking about since 1914 that generation would not pass. But they didn't mean 70 years then. Been way over 100 now. But what they meant was that those who were standing there, like 20, 30 years old in 1914, wouldn't pass away. So it'd be like about 40 years, not 70 or 100. So when the Bible says this generation, it meant the race, and will not pass away meant the people that were mature would not grow old and die. So it was a 40-year period. And interestingly enough, the Jewish nation passed away 40 years later. If he died in 30, exactly 40 years, just like the thing with Israel in the wilderness for 40 years and spying out the land for 40 days, and all the places where the Bible uses this 40 for a generation or a period of time that the spawn, race, or brood would last. Fits exactly. If Jesus died in 30, it would have been all over by 70. In fact, you might say it would have to happen by 70. And that would mean that Jesus must have been crucified in 30, because that would be the exact 40 years. And if Jesus said it, it would have to happen. But there's more. Now, this is something I want to share with you that I've never heard before. And this, to me, literally almost clinches it. The Jewish Talmud has a strange story. And this is the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud, both. There were two different Talmuds, the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. And in the Babylonian Talmud, Yoma 39b, they record that the temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, and that 4 supernatural omens began occurring continuously in the temple for exactly 40 years before it was destroyed in 70. So these supernatural occurrences started in 30. Number 1, the crimson thread. On the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, a crimson wool thread was tied to the temple door. For centuries, it miraculously turned white as a supernatural sign that deity had forgiven Israel's sins, mirroring Isaiah 118. The Talmud states that starting 40 years before 70, the thread ceased turning white and remained blood red. So then, there was another miracle. Every single night, the massive, heavy brass doors of the temple sanctuary, were locked by multiple guards. Yet for 40 years, the priests would wake up in the morning to find the temple doors swinging wide open on their own. The leading rabbi of the era, Yochanan ben Zakkai, explicitly declared this was an omen that the temple's destruction was imminent. Look, this is provided for us in history. Our Bible's provided for us, but nobody ever seemed to be able to get it all straight because they had all these different Protestant views and doctrines and apostasies going on. Nobody could ever get it straight. How would you? You're 2,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago, you wouldn't know what to make of it. But the closer we get to the end, we begin to see all these miracles and these things that happened. The Lord did this. The Lord inspired the Jews in their own Talmud to tell us when Christ was crucified. It had to have been in the year 30, exactly 40 years, because Jesus said, your house is left unto you desolate. That they were going to be destroyed within that 40-year generation. And there it is. And then there's more. And this is, I think, to me, it's maybe proof, but I don't want to say proof for the date because we don't know the day and the hour. And even if we knew that Jesus was crucified in 30, that wouldn't necessarily mean he's going to come back in 2030 because we might still have something wrong. But it certainly does, especially with current events over there. It's just getting worse over there. The Strait of Hormuz and the other strait, they're not opening. The financial world's backing Russia and the United States. This is going to be a battle to the end. The Lord has put it into their hearts to burn Babylon with fire. That's the whole system we live in. Babylon. The Jewish system we live in. He'll burn her with fire and eat up her flesh. But the center lamp of the golden temple menorah, the westernmost branch, which was used to light all the other lamps and was expected to burn perpetually, kept miraculously going out on its own every night. And then number 4. On Yom Kippur, the high priest drew 2 lots from a box, one for the Lord's sacrificial goat and one for the scapegoat, Azazel. It was considered a sign of deity's favor if the for the Lord lot was drawn in the priest's right hand. For those final 40 years, against all mathematical odds of probability, the lot always came up in the left hand. Means they're going to be destroyed. So, the second temple was destroyed on the 9th of Av in 70 AD. Mathematically, 40 years from 30 AD brings us to 70 AD. So this means that Jesus had to have been crucified at the age of 33 years old. At that time. And this means that it fits perfectly with the 14th year of Tiberius Caesar. It fits perfectly with when Herod died in 4 BC. Everything fits perfectly with this. The Talmud source, completely hostile to the message of Christianity, openly admits that the exact moment that Jesus died on the cross in 30 AD, the entire sacrificial system of the temple broke down. Deity stopped changing the crimson thread white because the ultimate once and for all sacrifice for sin had just been paid on the cross. The temple doors kept swinging open because the veil had been torn from top to bottom, exposing the Holy of Holies to the world. So, Jesus is born 4 BC. Herod dies, just before Herod dies. 27 AD, Jesus turns 30 years old. He was about 30 years old, according to Luke, the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar. 30 AD then is 3 years, and we'll go over this exactly here in a second, but Jesus is crucified on a Thursday. Now, everybody says he was crucified on a Friday, but remember, he was in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. If you crucify him on a Friday, then you're in the grave Saturday, and Sunday morning he's resurrected. What? 1 day, a day and a half? That's not 3 days and 3 nights by any stretch of the imagination. So Jesus was crucified on Thursday, Passover, under Pontius Pilate. That fits with the blood moon, the Passover that they had on that year. It was on a Thursday. And it triggered the 40-year temple Talmudic omens that we read about. So, 40 years later, the Roman siege occurs, and the 3.5-year tribulation never came. Not the one that a type or a shadow came. But the real tribulation never came because it was cut off from the other 69.5 weeks of Daniel. We're waiting for it. The book of Daniel, Revelation, the New Testament says we're all sitting around waiting for this. This is what we're looking for. The abomination spoken of by Daniel the prophet. To then go ahead and run the 1,260 days. It's called the times of the Gentiles. That means that in 2030 AD, 2030 would be exactly 2,000 years, 2 days, and on the third day he'll raise us up, Hosea says. That marks the timeline window for his return. If that is true, and I think we can prove it, and I'll give you some more evidence for it, then there will be a 3.5-year period of tribulation. We can be certain of that. He says it over and over again. 1,260 days, he swears. And immediately after the tribulation, he'll see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. So, the tribulation could not have occurred in 70 because we didn't see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, setting up, establishing his kingdom with a lamb lying down with a wolf, and the lion eating straw like the bull. None of that happened. They're still doing harm in his holy mountain. Right? The Jews didn't repent. Right? They're supposed to look upon the one whom they pierced and weep for him. A national repentance. And all Israel will be saved. None of this has ever happened. So, we can verify with absolute certainty from the Roman Senate records that Lucius Aulus Sejanus was executed on October the 18th, 31 AD. Jesus had to have died before then, because he was the one pushing for it. Because Passover always takes place in April or in the spring, Jesus could not have been crucified the same calendar year after October. This leaves the option that the crucifixion was in April of 30, so that he died in the spring or Passover time in 30 AD. And Sejanus was still alive at the height of his power. He intensely hated the Jews. He actively encouraged the Roman governors to mistreat Jewish populations. And under that timeline, Pilate caved in to the Jewish mob, not because he was afraid of Tiberius Caesar, but because he was a brutal puppet of Sejanus, and he knew that Sejanus would protect him from any political fallout. And we also know that because of Roman history, it's pretty clear. We have, anything before BC, we don't know the dates. But we can be almost certain that Sejanus died October the 18th, 31 AD. We can be pretty darn sure that Herod died 4 BC. Although that date is a little softer, it's still heavily debated because it relies entirely on calculating the dates backward from the destruction of Jerusalem using conflicting provincial records or whatever that are all over the place. So we're not completely certain about Herod's death, but Luke chapter 3 verse 1 states that John the Baptist began preaching in the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar. That date we're almost certain about. We know that when Tiberius reigned, his co-principal reign was in 27 AD. He was actually given joint military command over the Roman provinces alongside Augustus. So that's starting from 12 AD, that's 15 years to the 15th year of Tiberius' reign, which is 27 AD. Virtually everything we know about Herod's death comes from Flavius Josephus. However, historians do look outside for evidence to cross-check whether Josephus was right about the 4 BC date. Evidence supports the 4 BC date, though, very clearly, because the successor coins and archaeology point to it. Josephus writes that Herod's 3 sons, Archelaus, Antipas, and Philip, took over portions of his kingdom immediately after he died. Archaeologists find that ancient coins minted by these sons have dates stamped on them, and their reign began in 4 BC or 3 BC. That heavily supports that Josephus was telling the truth. If the 4 BC lunar eclipse that Josephus notes, Herod died shortly after a lunar eclipse and just before Passover, astronomers confirm a partial lunar eclipse occurred on March 13th, 4 BC. So because Sejanus was executed by Tiberius Caesar in October of 31 AD, then the crucifixion was almost certainly April, Passover of 30 AD. Sejanus was alive and ruling Rome with an iron fist. He hated Jewish people and protected his governors when they oppressed them. The Jewish leadership knew Pilate's boss, Sejanus, was highly anti-Jew. If Pilate refused to execute Jesus, the crowd threatened a massive riot. Pilate knew if a riot broke out, Sejanus would remove him for failing to control the peace. To prevent a riot that would anger Sejanus, Pilate caved in to the crowd's demands in 30 AD. Then, a year later, in 31 AD, Tiberius discovered Sejanus' plot and killed him. That's what we know. It fits perfectly, and it matches the timeline seamlessly. Jesus didn't die because of Sejanus' death. Rather, Jesus' death in April 30th happened right before Sejanus fell from power in Rome. Our point about the biblical generation being 40 years is firmly rooted in Scripture, just like the Israelites wandering 40 years in the wilderness. Jesus warned his disciples, this generation or race will not pass away until all these things take place. That's in Matthew 24, verse 34. The Jewish rabbis in the Talmud explicitly confirm that the supernatural signs of judgment in the temple began 40 years before 70 AD. Since the temple fell in 70, and we know this beyond a doubt, these are confirmed dates, the clock had to have started precisely in 30 AD. This is almost conclusive evidence for what we're saying. Jesus died in the spring of 30. We can trace his timeline backward to his birth. The Gospel of John tracks at least 3 distinct Passovers during Jesus' ministry. John 2 verse 13, John 6 verse 4, and the final Passover where he died. This requires his ministry to be a minimum of 2.5 to 3 years. If we count 3 years backwards from the April 30th crucifixion, that puts Jesus' baptism in the fall of 27 AD. We know it was in the fall because Jesus was born in September, right after the sheep were brought in from the field as it was going into winter. His birthday could not be in the spring. And so we know that Jesus was probably baptized on the fall equinox. And therefore, he was baptized when he turned 30, the Bible says. So he was baptized in September, the end of September 2027. Luke 3:23 states that Jesus was 30 years of age. And remember, there's no year zero when you're counting BC to AD. There's no zero year. So if Jesus is born in the final months of 4 BC, and we go up to the year 27 AD, no year one, we get this. 3-year duration of his ministry. He was born in 4 BC, turned 30 in 27 AD, was crucified at 33 in 30 AD. Now look at this. Well, let's go back to Herod. The wise men traveled from the east, and that took several months. It had to take several months for them to travel. By the time they arrived in Matthew chapter 2, verse 11, it said they visited Jesus in a house, not a manger. Herod asked the wise men exactly when the star appeared. Based on the answer, he killed all the children up to 2 years old. This proves that Jesus could have been anywhere from a newborn up to a year or two when they fled to Egypt. If Jesus was born in late 4 BC, the wise men arrived, the family fled to Egypt, and Herod died shortly after in early 4 BC. The entire stay in Egypt could have been just a few weeks or months, we don't know. And then Herod passed away, and then they safely returned. That completely unifies the timeline from 4 BC in his birth, 30 AD when his crucifixion, 70 AD destruction of Jerusalem, 40 years later, and 2030 AD for the return, exactly 2,000 years later, 2 days after, 2,000 years after his death. Our logic is completely coherent. It represents some real brilliant chronological synthesis, especially when we throw in the verified Talmudic from both the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud, and 4 different miracles that prove, confirmed by history that everybody confirms, proves that Jesus had to have died in 30. So now think about this, guys. Jesus could not have died anytime sooner, because we know the date when Tiberius Caesar began to reign. 27. That's when Jesus was baptized. We could take off a few months here or there. Maybe something we're misunderstanding. We know that Herod died in 4 BC. It had to have been before 4 BC. It had to have been no later than 27 AD or 28 AD when Jesus was baptized. Jesus couldn't have been crucified after 31 AD because Sejanus had already been executed by Tiberius Caesar. Jesus said there would be 40 years from the time that he died till Jerusalem would be destroyed. The Jewish people, both the Babylonian and the Jerusalem Talmud, tell us in no uncertain terms that it was 40 years later that these signs began to happen when Jesus died in 30 AD and kept up until it was destroyed in 70. So, if Jesus died in 30, he has to return 2,000 years later. I mean, at least I think so. Especially with all the current events. That would mean that the 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years, must occur by fall of this year. If it does not, then everything we're saying is completely wrong. And I have no idea what to think. If it does not occur, if the Great Tribulation does not begin, World War III, famine, pestilence, economic collapse, all these things, does not occur by fall of this year. I will be surprised because everything's lined up for it. And I can't see it going beyond 30. Because if you go till spring of the year after in 31, maybe we're off a little bit. It could be 32. But what I'm telling you is that we are at the door. We've got the UN Agenda 2030. The United Nations Sustainable Developmental Goals are structurally designed with a hard target deadline of 2030. That's a literal global agenda to centralize the economy, the resources, and the governance of the world by that year. Now remember, that's why Jesus has to return. Because they're trying to destroy us by having us bound in some, abomination that's going to cause great desolation. We also have prominent futurists like Ray Kurzweil, Elon Musk, and others that say that humanity is going to have a singularity in 2030, and artificial intelligence is their singularity. They claim that artificial intelligence, AI, will be running the world by that time. If the Lord allows that to happen, we'll all be stuck. There will be no more human minds to save. We'll all be completely controlled by AI. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,335 days. The angel in Daniel says that there's going to be an extra 75 days beyond the standard 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation. The 1,260 days mark the end of the Antichrist activity, his allotted reign of terror. The extra 75 days are the window where Christ physically arrives, executes judgment, cleanses the defiled sanctuary, and establishes the administration of his kingdom. Anyone who survives through the horrific 1,260 days and remains until he comes, which is the days of wrath, he makes it under the 1,335 days, is pronounced blessed and holy because they have officially stepped into the fully established place of Christ's kingdom on earth. Given that the 3.5-year countdown must occur before Christ comes, it stands to reason that these 42 months will take place anytime, at any moment, but it must occur before the fall of this year. If it does not, I won't stop believing in the Lord. I won't stop believing in the Bible. I won't say, oh, I guess the Bible's not true. I will probably find out somewhere along the way where I made the error. I trust the Bible 100%, which is why I think that it's very likely this is all going to happen. When you look at the world events right now, and we're running out of oil, we're running out of fertilizer, we're running out of everything, I don't see how it could not happen. And that's the truth. Well, I guess we should close it there. We're over an hour. And I hope you have a wonderful evening. Guys, I really think this is serious business. Watch the news. I think things are about to go down. Make sure you're prepared. Get you some food. Start stocking up food. That's what people are going to need. And if you stay there in the city, they're just going to steal it. So you got to get yourself out to the Rocky Mountains, and preferably, while you still have time, buy some land near me here in Candy Kitchen. And if it gets down to it and you drag your feet too long, I don't know what's going to happen. But if you can, no matter what, even if it's too late, just get in a car or hitchhike and get out here. I guarantee it. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and go. Hope you have a wonderful evening. And the Lord loves you so very much. His grace, His peace will always be with you. And we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one, guys.